Hello, hello. Ooh, that works. That works, doesn't it? Hi. Hello, everybody. And everybody that's coming in, come on in. They've got plenty of room. Happy to have you here today, both here and we're also live streaming this. So welcome to everyone that's at home as well. My name is Ty Sidgley, and I'm a visiting professor of history and the executive director of Common Ground. And learned this lesson from last time. Could you please silence your cell phone? Because we had a couple go off last time and I forgot to ask people about it. So thank you so much for coming to this, our fourth Common Ground this semester. Our mission is to explore cross-boundary political thought and complex social issues. Common Ground brings highly respected thought leaders to Hamilton campus to participate in small classroom dialogue and large event discussions. Topics intertwined with the college's curriculum are chosen to foster critical thinking and holistic examination of difficult and often contentious national global issues. And this semester, we've been focusing on climate. Our Common Ground tonight is the stage. We aren't trying to change your position on an issue. Instead, we want to bring people together to learn about complex issues and highlight differences in a civil way. That's our goal tonight. I want to thank a few people. President David Whitman for hosting us tonight. Thank you, David. The Common Ground team, Katie Stewart, Kim Ritchie, and our Common Ground student assistants for all the work they did. Thanks. And the college is grateful to Mary Helen and Robert Morris, class of 76 and parents of 16 and 17, Eve Niquette and Charles Pohl, parents of 20 and 25, and Lori and David Hess, 77, who are here with us today. Thank you all. Your support remains indispensable. A reminder that our final event this semester on December 4th is upcoming. Common Ground and the Bipartisan Policy Center will host two former members of Congress, Florida Senate candidate Val Demings, who was on President Biden's short list for vice president, and former Senator Roy Blunt from Missouri. Steve Scully from the Bipartisan Policy Center will bring his Sirius XM radio show on the POTUS channel to campus. Now it's my honor to introduce our moderator, Hamilton Environmental Studies Professor Aaron Strong, who will then introduce our distinguished panelists. Professor Strong is an interdisciplinary sustainability scientist whose research focuses on understanding the impacts of climate change and the dynamics of climate feedbacks in both terrestrial and marine systems, including work on ocean acidification, carbon sequestration, and sea level rise. Professor Strong co-authored Hamilton's updated climate action plan and is the architect of the college's strategy to go carbon neutral by 2030. Aaron received his bachelor's from Swarthmore College, his master's from Tufts University, and his doctorate from Stanford University. Please join me in welcoming Aaron and our distinguished panel to Hamilton College.
Thank you so much, Ty, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for being here tonight. It's my honor to moderate tonight's program, and I have the distinguished pleasure to introduce our two visitors and guests tonight. On my left is Governor Christine Todd Whitman. She served in President George W. Bush's cabinet as administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency from 2001 to June 2003. She was the 50th governor of the state of New Jersey, serving as its first woman governor from 1994 until 2001. She's currently president of the Whitman Strategy Group, a consulting firm that specializes in innovative solutions to environmental and energy challenges. On my right is Gina McCarthy. Gina McCarthy served in President Obama's cabinet as administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. You'll note we have two former administrators of the EPA here tonight. From 2013 to 2017. She was then president and CEO of the Natural Resources Defense Council, one of the nation's largest and most influential environmental advocacy organizations. Most recently, she served President Biden's administration as the first ever White House National Climate Advisor, where her leadership as the head of the Climate Policy Office led to the most aggressive action on climate in US history and helped restore US climate leadership on the global stage. So tonight's topic is to discuss how pathways to the energy transition are going. We have perspectives from both sides of the aisle here, and we're going to search for areas of disagreement, although it may be hard to find some of those. we're going to start with a series of questions from me. We're going to have a conversation, and then we're going to invite questions from the audience, which you'll need to find someone going around with the mics for. So thank you so much for joining.
Are you okay sitting on the left and I'm on the right?
Oh,
or should
I thought it was great. It would kind of, it would really.
It's the left for them and the right. So I think we did it correctly.
Okay, good. All right.
We got
just
it?
checking. Just checking.
So Gina, I start my class every semester. It's a class on climate change. And I say, by the end of this course, you will be optimistic about our ability to address the climate crisis. And everybody laughs because they think it's a joke. So my question for you is, are you optimistic, given the role that you just had in the Biden administration, about our ability in this country to address the climate crisis?
Yes.
Would you care to elaborate?
Should I elaborate a little
She told me she was going to just answer yes
question.
and no.
I thought it was a trick question.
Why are you?
You know, I am absolutely optimistic. First of all, I choose to be. I often share the stage with people who give you 90 million reasons why people will die from 90 million different things. But honestly, you have, I've been doing environmental work for 40 plus decades, right? No, well, I look good, don't I? 40 plus years. And I think that we have right now the technologies, the practices, the policies, the products that we actually need to succeed. And I think people understand the challenge before us. I think all of those solutions will be beneficial to human beings, not just the planet. I spend all of my time talking about the benefits that matter to people. I think we have resources that are being committed to this. I think the private sector is engaging in a robust way. I think the challenge is going to be a global one. It is, obviously, but the challenge of bringing those investment opportunities to the global south and small island nations is something that I think we need to sincerely focus on, both as a moral issue, never mind as a global environmental challenge. So yes, I'm optimistic, and no matter what you ask me or say, I'm still going to be optimistic. So go for it.
Governor Whitman, are you concerned about the trajectory of the climate crisis? What gives you, do you have that sense of fear or dread that we sometimes hear about the future in terms of the impacts of climate change? What should we be afraid of?
Well, we should be afraid of we're not taking it seriously enough politically. Those who need to make the decisions that are really going to affect how we address the issue are refusing to engage in a positive way. They're looking at it, unfortunately, through the partisan political prism, which means they are focusing on how do I use this to excite my base, not how do we solve this issue. I mean, I agree with Gina 100%. We have all the talent, we have all the ability. There is so much that's really exciting that's going on, and new technologies and people engaged in finding ways to address this issue. The understanding that it is beginning to really penetrate with people, that this is in fact a national security issue for the United States. What happens in sub-Saharan Africa with the droughts and things displacing people and governments that are not the most stable anyway has real implications for us. It also has real implications for our military, particularly the Navy, and where the naval bases are located. When you get sea level rise and you get the kind of intrusion, saltwater intrusion that we're seeing, they're having to rethink how they do things and where they are. So it's an enormous issue. People are finally getting that Mother Nature's a little unhappy with us at the moment. But we still can't get yet a commitment by those who should know better to really start to give this issue the attention it deserves. I will say I think the White House has done a really good job. When the administration first came in, we were discussing this a little earlier, the president said, this is not an issue for just the Environmental Protection Agency or the Department of Energy. It is every department and agency. Decisions made on transportation, decisions made on housing, on healthcare, they all impact climate change. We have everything. We have the tools. We can do it if we just will get government to be serious enough about it. And that's why I am optimistic, because the states are the ones that are starting to lead this, and they are moving forward. And municipalities, there are a lot of major cities that have made huge investments on green roofs and different ways of ensuring that they're taking steps to appropriately limit their emissions. So it's happening. It's just, it could be more, it could be faster, it could be better if we could get the federal politicians to pay a little more attention.
So I sense a lot of excitement from both of you about these solutions. And one of the sort of primary vehicles that we have right now in the United States to drive some of this innovation is the Inflation Reduction Act. We alluded to that briefly in the introduction to you, Gina. Some climate policy experts describe this law from 2022 as the most important piece of climate and energy legislation in this country ever. So it's supposed to kickstart some of these solutions. Gina, what does this act do, and why do you think it's such a big deal?
Well, I think I was very happily the president and CEO of NRDC before Joe Biden won the presidency. I loved that job. I loved NRDC. I made money for the first time in my life.
400 years.
And I got a call from Joe Biden. And now I didn't make more money. I kind of made a lot less. But the reason I'm raising this is that we called, and he really believed that we were, this was during COVID, right? And we had to rebuild our sense of hope and optimism, and we had to actually literally rebuild our communities. And so his whole idea and framing was that climate is always proposed as if it's a sacrifice to fix it, instead of looking at it as an opportunity. And he just tossed it all on its head. And he said, Gina, we're going to talk about how we have to grow jobs again. We're going to talk about how we have to save people money. We're going to talk about good paying union jobs. We're going to talk about how we actually focus on the communities that have been left behind, because this has to be a just transition. And then we talked about all the opportunities there were. And so the reason why I think I'm raising this is that the Inflation Reduction Act was the epitome of how you turn this corner from asking people to bemoan the problems that they have. And this was all about how you actually, again, spark hope and optimism in our country. We needed jobs. We needed people to get engaged. We can't just focus on big things that are far away that produce energy in a cleaner way. We have to make people think that their homes can meet that vision. We can make their lives better, keep their kids safer, and oh, by the way, clean the air at the same time. So what's happened is when we did the Inflation Reduction Act, that was a $370 billion investment in people, in projects, in opportunities, Ed. What we're seeing in just, what has it been, a year and a half or something? Yeah. We're seeing 220,000 new jobs. We're talking about $310 billion in investments. This is a 10-year bill. This is how you change hearts and minds. This is why I went to work in the White House. This is a game changer. The minute that this bill went into action, I got calls from France, Germany, Spain. Every country was going, what are you doing? This is protectionist. I'm saying, you know what we're doing? We're rebuilding our country again. We're going to produce things in the United States of America. This is going to be our job, our country. And by the way, the only protectionist part of it is that if you want to do an EV credit, you got to have some domestic content. Woohoo! You know what I mean? And so, and immediately the EU, every individual country started to take a similar approach. This is how we will win. If we think the only way to win is by asking people to turn their lights off, to stick their head in the sand, then all of us across the world will lose. This is how you win. That's what the IRA is all about. That's why the success so far is so phenomenal, because it's just the start. And frankly, I spend a lot of my time with local communities and states, traveling around, talking about the benefits here, because everyone needs to understand it so they can have access to it. I don't want anyone left behind. And the minute it actually presents to you in your home the ability to save money and live better and keep your kids healthier, we are going to win. That's the touchdown for us. Except the Patriots aren't very good
No,
at
they're
it.
not.
No, they're not.
We've talked
But
about
we'll
this.
keep working on this.
Governor Whitman, do you have concerns about the Inflation Reduction Act, or are there things that it doesn't do that you think it should do? It's a lot of money. It's spending a lot of money through tax credit vehicles to allow people to buy electric vehicles and install heat pumps and do these things in their home that are part of this energy transition. Is that the right approach in your mind?
I think this is a game changer. I would agree. I mean, sorry, not
No,
gonna have a disagreement. I know,
I'm
we're
keeping
trying to
score.
find
We're
this
trying to get the
area of
disagreement.
disagreement.
We'll find some.
You know, it's not perfect. No bill is. And not all the money is getting out to where it needs to go. There are blocks, there are things that are slow, there are things that are not working exactly the way they were intended. But that's normal. And the fact that it has made the kind of change that it already has made, and as Gina said, a 10-year bill, is pretty extraordinary. And it's the jumpstart that we need for people to understand we can do this. And you get back to the simplistic things. We were talking about this earlier. I can remember when Energy Star program started. And those devices, those appliances, when they first came out with Energy Star, were significantly more expensive than the regular. Until we got to the point where there were enough being made that the price started to come down, and then everybody wanted them. And that's what this is going to do. This is going to create that momentum that is going to make it less expensive for people to do the right thing and what they really want to do. Americans do care about their environment. They do care about making things better. I mean, I live in the most densely populated state in the nation, in New Jersey. And when I was doing my re-elect in 1997, I ran on a platform of a $1 billion bond issue to preserve open space and parkland, farming and parkland and parks and cities. And 21 counties also had open space bills to tax themselves to preserve open space, and a lot of municipalities had it. And our fear was that people would either vote for $1 billion, which is a huge amount to preserve 1 million acres, or they'd vote for the local, but not for both. They passed the $1 billion overwhelmingly, and all but 2 counties passed their bills. I mean, people care. If they have the opportunity, they're even willing to tax themselves a little bit more to do what they know is right and keep those spaces open and improve the environment. So I think while it's not perfect, it isn't always working the way we want it to, it was a game changer, and it will be and continue to be.
So we want Americans to adopt these new technologies. The Inflation Reduction Act provides incentives to do that. And both of you are painting a picture that this is the kickstart. We're pushing the ball down the hill, and it's going to roll towards a future of a transition to renewable energy. And I want to kind of just take a step back from that a moment and kind of pose this vision. You know, I was driving down the thruway in New York State recently in a gas-powered vehicle, passed mostly by other gas-powered vehicles.
I'm outraged.
Yeah, you should
About
be.
you,
No,
I don't
my
care
son
about
is
that.
outraged too. And we drove past buildings that were mostly heated by oil, natural gas, and semi-tractor trailer passes me. It's powered by fossil fuels. We have a big fossil fuel economy here. Then you pick up the newspaper and it says all the offshore wind projects in New Jersey and New York are canceled because the supply chains aren't going to work and because the companies are pulling out and it's not going to work. And you get this sense of, okay, yes, great, there's some tax credits out there, maybe I can afford them, I want to think about it. It just doesn't seem like enough to move an economy away from fossil fuels. And so convince me that this ball has been pushed, or that there are more things that need to be done. Because if the goal is to transition away from fossil fuels, and we have to do that quickly, the science says we have to do that quickly, it doesn't seem like it's happening that quickly around us when we look around sometimes.
Well, you know, to ever say that it's all that we need is kind of crazy, right? I mean, and I hear that a lot, the criticism, oh, it's great, but it doesn't go far enough.
Yeah.
I got that, knew that. But all you can do is what you can do at the moment in time, and you go for as much as you possibly can. Then you explore. What this is doing, though, is growing an opportunity for, frankly, your students and others to figure out what's next. I cannot fix climate change with one bill. Wish I could. You know, but you've got to celebrate the successes, and you've got to then strive for what is the next thing that we can do. You're absolutely right. To address climate fast is really hard. To actually advance change in all sectors fast seems impossible. If I live long enough, I'm going to come back and talk to you about this. If I don't live that long, I'll come back and haunt you. Because you're going to say, geez, it really happened. Because you know as well as I do, change is remarkable. You know, you're already seeing the effect of like this downhill race. And we just have to not lose sight of celebrating the wins and then hunkering down and see what's next. There are a whole lot of
things going on. I mean, I co-chair an Aspen Institute K through 12 climate change task force, now goes through higher education. And one of the things we did is talk to a lot of schools across the country to learn how they were integrating, talk to the students and what they were doing on integrating climate change into the curriculum, and how they were going to the town council meetings and changing the policies. They'd go to school board meetings and change policies. They'd go talk to their mayor and their council and really have an influence. But what was exciting too, there's a school in Arlington that was built ground up as a net zero energy building. Same cost per square foot as a regular construction. And yet the whole thing was returning energy, basically. And the whole structure, I mean, it was fascinating because each level of the school was a different strata of the earth. It was below the oceans, and then obviously the sky, and everything was geared around it, but it was so integrated that the kids were really getting an understanding of it. And they had a thing in the middle that showed them at any given time whether they were producing more energy than they were using. And it just grew the awareness. And it's little things like that that tell you there's so much potential. And if you think about where you need to look, for instance, on affecting air quality, the largest public fleet is school buses. And most of them are diesel. And if you can transition those school buses to electric, you'll make a huge difference and improve the health of the kids, because think of how long school buses idle outside of schools while they're waiting for pickup. And they are polluting the entire time they're there. And so it's hard to get people to understand the cumulative impact of individual behavior, but it's real and it does have an impact. And we're not going to change this overnight, and this bill is a 10-year effort already. I mean, but it's going to probably take it's going to take longer than that. I mean, yes, we're under pressure, we've got to start acting, but the point is we have to take it seriously, and we do have to look at those wins and say it's not insignificant that you have a school that is totally energy neutral that was built on the same cost per square foot as a regular construction.
Well, last year, global investments in clean energy surpassed fossil fuel investments for the first time. Now, that may not seem big to you, but in my world, that's pretty big. And it's expected that by 2025, we're going to have 35% clean energy. And
I don't know, do you know of a utility that doesn't have an investment in renewables?
I don't know.
I don't think there's one.
I mean, the trick's going to be, and so sorry if this is more controversial than we want to do.
We want
but,
controversial.
Okay, we need to keep investing in clean energy, but at the same time, we cannot allow continued expansion of fossil fuels. We have to ratchet that down.
Governor Whitman, there are many members of the right side of the aisle who would disagree with that last statement. Is there a room for any continued use of fossil fuels or investment in fossil fuels in your mind?
Well, we're not going to do this overnight. We're going to need all of the above for a period of time until we can get the renewables to be base power instead of peak shaving. I will say something that I know is controversial with a lot of people, but I believe in nuclear power. I believe particularly in small modular reactors and the ability of those to be more safely constructed and put in place than the large ones. The other part of it is the rest of the world is going back to nuclear. And if we're not going to do it ourselves, if we don't want it here, we should at least be investing in the development of it so we can sell our products overseas to places that really want it. But they're new, there's salt molten reactors, there are different ways of producing nuclear energy now that is safer and easier and quicker. And small SMRs can actually do a whole village as well as a factory. So that there's a lot of potential there, and that's the only form of base power that releases no environmental pollutants or greenhouse gases while it's producing power. If you go down the whole chain, of course there's going to be, as you do your mining for the minerals that you need, you're going to have emissions, but you do with anything. You do it with solar panels, you do that with windmills. So what we have to get our heads around is it's going to be a trade-off. And we have to decide, what are we willing to live with? Because there's nothing that doesn't have some impact on something. Whether it's, wind farms and birds that don't look the same as they go out of it as they did going into it, or what does it do below the surface of the ocean when you have the wind farms out in the ocean? What does it do if you have a big field of solar panel? How does that affect the ecosystem below it? There are going to be trade-offs. But we have to decide what we're willing to live with, and what we don't want to be is, look at New Delhi right now. They've had to cancel schools because the air quality is so bad, and I'm sure EPA did a lot with India. And we've both been there, we've both looked at it from that perspective, and the health quality of the citizens is severely compromised by the air quality. And we've seen that with the smokes from the fires in Canada.
Christy, that's why I started, to realize that we need to be a little bit more vocal on fossil, because fossil is the culprit for both climate and the health problems. 7 million kids, I'm sorry, not just kids, 7 million, is it people or kids? Well, they're people. 7 million people die every year from exposure to air pollution. 7 million. And you can almost get no money going to this health crisis. I think it's like 1 billion a year across the world is dedicated to this challenge. We just have to face the facts that fossil fuel is terrific to build our country. It's just no longer the path forward. And we have to admit that and just figure this out. And it isn't going to be tomorrow. But I don't think we can separate these challenges between air quality and climate in the way that we've been doing before. I'm part of a group that the UN is sponsoring, where we're getting together all the time. And they said, well, we just need more money for air quality. I said, no, you need more money for climate. Because that's the only place where there's money right now.
A lot.
And the only thing we disagree on, I think, Christy, on nuclear, is that I think fission still remains very far away. I went to the Princeton fission, fusion lab, and they were so excited because they got something to collide for a millionth of a second or something.
No, it's actually, they did almost a second.
I stand corrected. I'm excited now. We're
We found
ways
our
away.
disagreement.
And small modular reactors sound, well, they don't sound good to me. I'm a creature of the 70s. I'm sorry. Nuclear is not my fave. But I understand that they're different. But I just feel like government would need to force that upon communities. Rather than, no, I know you wouldn't want that. I just can't imagine it being welcomed with open arms.
Well, there are some, there were four actually large nuclear reactors proposed, two in South Carolina and two in Georgia. And the economics just didn't work.
They got killed, yeah.
Once you get into those communities and you answer very real, legitimate concerns and questions that people have about nuclear power, it was amazing how much more relaxed they were about it. But I agree with you. We're not going to have any more
I'm
big
talking
ones.
about the small ones. Those
SMRs
community
are
based is going to be
different.
very
We're not going to have
hard.
any big ones anymore.
Yeah.
But if you look at it, when California closed down the San Onofre nuclear reactor, their pollution levels went up and the cost of energy went up dramatically. So it's a question of, can we keep, is it safe? And I would argue it is pretty safe to keep the big ones going a little bit longer, not to start closing them all down because we don't like nuclear reactors, to give us that bridge, a time to bridge, to be able to put the investment into the renewables. And we were talking earlier about white hydrogen, which is, there are a lot of colors in hydrogen.
It's like a rainbow now.
Yeah,
There's
it
blues
is.
and greens, and
But
I'm
white
trying to keep up.
hydrogen is actually very prolific. There's a lot in the United States. Mali has a lot, and it's very clean energy, very clean energy. And it's a question of, those are the kinds of things we need to be looking at and investing in, and how do we capture that? How do we use that as a legitimate power source that makes some sense?
Hydrogen is, I think its highest and best use is in heavy industry.
Yeah.
There are industries that just have no solutions that we can offer. Hydrogen is one.
So a few years ago, I went to a public hearing about climate in New York State. New York has a new Climate Act from 2019 and a new scoping plan. And this disagreement about nuclear is not surprising for me to hear, because that was the axis of disagreement in the public community comments. One side being pro-nuclear and pro-hydrogen in particular, and the other being skeptical of nuclear, and we can find an ability to have base load on the grid, you know, the basic service on the grid, through other means. But I want to bring that conversation about whether communities would accept that back to the communities around here. Many people in the audience are from the Clinton area, and we're situated here in upstate New York. And this is a pretty hot topic locally here. So locally, New York's aggressive climate actions have led to lots and lots of proposed solar farms, new wind farms, proposals to put in large lithium battery farms. And there's some concern in communities around here about how this changes the landscape, and concern about large solar and wind installations. If you drive around, you see signs that say, farms for food, not solar, no big wind on my hill, no battery farms. That's a lived experience of people here. I mean, these are all great ideas about the energy transition, but for people in this community here, the energy transition looks like proposals that they don't seem to want. So how, kind of what conversations should we have in these communities about this transition when there's already a resistance or a concern about the technologies? We have this painted picture of a great future where all the technologies are going to come and be cost effective, and we're going to have our hot showers and our cold beers in ways that don't, kill the planet, which is great. We all want that.
At the same time,
right,
are we going to do that?
Yeah.
I'm just
it's a
visioning.
It's a good suggestion. So, what would you tell people around here who are concerned about solar and wind coming into their communities?
Well, you said the right word, conversation.
Yeah.
That's what has to happen. You have to have conversation with the communities that are going to be involved. And sometimes those get a little raucous, sometimes they're not the most comfortable things to do, but the public has a right to be heard, and they have a right to hear the pro arguments and have their questions answered. They may not always agree with you at the end, but they get a lot more comfortable with the decisions when they know, when they've had that ability to question and to ask. The worst thing that can happen is for the state to come in and say, you are going to have this, period, the end. No more discussion, this is for the greater good, and you're gonna have it. What you need to do is have those local communities engaged. You need to have people have an opportunity to vent all their frustrations, all their concerns about it, and go through what are the trade-offs. What can you have, what can't you have, what's new in technology when you talk about the battery storage? You know, are you talking about the lithium batteries that you use on electric bicycles, which are the ones that blow up and the ones that have caused all the fires? Or do you talk about the big ones that it's a different technology and they're handled in a different way? The public has a right to have these questions answered, and that's what it takes, is a conversation.
I would interject, but the question sort of baffled me because I don't know where, it doesn't sound like the government's coming in and taking people's farms and putting solar.
No, farmers can get money for putting this on their land.
So if people are choosing to do that with their land, I'm having trouble finding out what the drama is about that.
I think people around in the community are concerned about permitting and how that changes the nature of the community to have big energy installations where there used to be farmland.
Okay. I don't have much to say because I mean, Christy's right, you have to talk about it.
Yep.
But it's not like you're putting a substation next to you. Yep. It's very different than that. It's hard for me to understand, other than I may not like the look of it. Yep. So you think it's changing the complexion of the community. Mm-hmm. I think that's a community level discussion. Right. That's where that discussion ought to happen. Yep. But it's not because there's any, that I'm aware that there's any damage to any of those things as a result of investing in them and putting them places.
So I'm going to shift and ask a question at a global scale, and then we're going to open things up for questions from the audience for a little bit, and then come back and have a kind of closing few questions and discussion. So globally, the Paris Agreement of 2015 sets a goal to hold warming to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Several recent scientific studies have suggested that it's all but impossible to hold warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we've already experienced warming of about 1.1 degrees Celsius. How's implementation of the Paris Agreement going? I mean, this was lauded as a big, we have a whole lot of countries committing to big climate action, and the US was part of that, and the original Clean Power Plan in 2015 was part of the proposal, and under the Biden administration, new commitments were made under the Paris Agreement, but it still seems like we're not hitting targets. So in both of your opinions, how is implementation of Paris going?
Swimmingly. I shouldn't be so fresh, but it's very difficult. These nationally determined contributions, I mean, I've worked on them for the United States, and it's great to come up with sort of a strategy for what you think you're going to reduce by when. But there's a stock take that's going to be coming up, and I think that's pretty much going to show that there isn't a country that's meeting their NDCs. So the question,
not a good look.
No, it's not. It doesn't bode well for sort of the global strategy. But I'm not sure that there aren't other ways of looking at how to turn this around and how to make this better. A part of the challenge that I dwell on is I don't know, I'm not convinced that this upcoming COP is going to be the most productive. And I think that's a very kind and subtle way for me to speak, which I'm not used to. So I'm hoping that it'll be okay, but there's big discussion about loss and damages and how do we really invest in the global South. There's big challenges there. There's big challenges having, a fossil fuel country be the host and the head of a fossil fuel company be the sort of leader during the COP. But we have to figure this out. I think honestly, we have to recognize that the NDC system has not worked. And
NDCs are these individual country pledges for climate action that were made under Paris.
It just hasn't. And maybe there's a way of reconciling and starting again in a different way. I would hope so.
With China, which is still, I mean, they're building some nuclear reactors, but they're building coal plants overnight. I mean, they are really moving fast with that, and that's obviously a bone of contention because we don't exactly have the best relations with China right now. We're not that friendly. So it's difficult, and nobody has met I don't think anybody has met their goals.
No, but I think I'm more worried about the Belt and Road Initiative that China instituted.
They're in every
and basically they went into, the global South and they started building things, and the debt that now those countries have accrued is just outstanding. It is weighing them down. And so that's why I think the investments are so critical. We have to do our part. And at this point, I cannot even envision this Congress doing anything about meeting our promises or our commitment. It is sort of laughable in a very sad way.
Just one last question before we open to the audience. To put it bluntly, if you're concerned about China building coal-fired power plants, about countries not meeting their commitments under Paris, why does it make sense for the United States to put all this effort in to do our part, given that it's a global climate and of course emissions have to get to net zero by 2050 at a global scale to avoid catastrophic climate change?
First of all, we're one of the largest emitters, no matter what.
True.
And so we have a role. We have a role to play. We have to do it. It's pretty hard to look at other countries and say, you have to do something if we're not willing to do anything. I mean, there is that question of leadership. That doesn't mean, and the thing about it is, when you say it that way, you're coming from that perspective of it's a zero-sum game, that you cannot have a clean and green environment and a healthy economy, and that's just wrong. Right. I mean, those two things absolutely go together, and the more you invest in the green economy, the more jobs you're producing. I mean, that's the whole thing we've been talking about up to this point. It is something that we have to get our minds around, that we should take advantage of it. It's a way to build our economy into the next generation. We have a responsibility. I mean, that's one of the roles that government has to play. For instance, we want to move away from fossil fuels and we want to get away from coal. You're not going to take a 54-year-old coal miner and turn them into a high-tech person. It's not going to happen, but they can build things like there's no tomorrow. I mean, we're some of the best in the world. So government has to be involved in creating the incentives to bring manufacturing to those areas where they're losing the other jobs. They need to make the climate, in small c, make the climate appropriate for that kind of investment, because you have an obligation to those people. That you can't tell them, sorry, your livelihood's gone out the window, and that's just too bad because we're sacrificing you to the greater good. We've been through this before. We were an agricultural country, and then we had the industrial age, and it dislocated a bunch of people. But we were able to figure it out and work our way through it, and that's what we have to do now.
All right. So we are now at the part of our program where we're going to open up to questions from the audience. As part of the culture of Common Ground, we're going to have student questions be visited first, but I also recognize that we have many people from the community here as well, and thank you for coming. So we're going to start with student questions and then transition and open it up more broadly to other questions. So if you have a question, please don't shout it out. Please raise your hand, and one of our assistants will bring the mic over. Questions?
There's one there. We've got one there.
Hi, thank you for your insight. This is really interesting. I had a question kind of pertaining to like students on campus here. It's hard not to feel like climate change is just this like huge all-consuming thing that's too big for any like one individual to tackle like head on. And I was wondering what your advice would be for students who are looking to see change on a more local or like regional scale when it comes to issues like, you know, fossil fuel and climate change and stuff like that.
Go to the next town council meeting and ask them, what are we doing for energy? What are your thoughts on energy? What kind of energy do we have? How are you dealing with this issue? Do you think it's important? What are we doing to reduce our emissions? Your voice is important, and it's amazing, but people do listen. Those of us that are in elective office or have been in elective office, we do listen. Don't always pay attention. We don't always do what you want us to do, but I don't care what level you're at, whether you answer your own phone or your own mail, you have somebody who's doing that for you. And they will tell you, look, this is what your constituents are concerned about. These are the issues they're concerned about. This is where they are on that issue. And that may not totally change your behavior, but it can. And it certainly changes your priorities. So you can start right now. And starting locally is a really good way to do it, and build up and build that momentum for change, and let people know you're holding them accountable, that you care about this. This is important, it's your future. We're messing it up. We've messed it up for fairly well. And now you have to dig us out of it. We'll do our part. We'll do as much as we can, but it's still going to be up to you guys. And that's something you can do right now that'll make a difference.
Can I just add a point to that, is that I don't want to leave here thinking that the Inflation Reduction Act, you know, just popped out of some grand idea, because it didn't. It has been 30 years of work at the local and state levels that has created the opportunity for this to happen. Change happens from the bottom up in a democracy that's working well. And so what you see in the Inflation Reduction Act is really the blood, sweat, and tears of where we've worked before at the local and state level. And then finally the federal government goes, oh, I got a new idea. And it's exactly what we've been yapping at them for 20 years. And so I do think and want to encourage you to think this as well, is that you can make a difference in your life at home, in your family, in your own communities. You can do wonders working at the local community level. You can offer to do an internship to help develop a climate action plan and strategy. Go to public meetings, make your voice be heard. Because I don't think this country has ever changed from the top down. That's not how it works. So go have some fun. You know, every state,
Stir it up.
45 countries got $3 million each. I'm sorry, 45 states got $3 million each to develop a climate plan. And those that didn't want to take it, those 5 states, it's going to their 3 biggest cities, because that's where the action's going to be. We've got money, it's got to be spent wisely. Yeah. That's going to be up to all of us to make sure that that happens.
There's one in the back there, and one here. One in the way back.
One back there, one over here.
Hello, thank you for speaking with us today. My question is, this time next year we have a big election. So are you concerned about how the results of this election will impact climate policy? And what can the current administration do to continue to make climate change during their time in office?
The current administration, I think, is going to keep on with its, were it to be reelected, it is going to keep on with its emphasis on climate. There's no question about that, on engaging all facets of the federal government and state government and local government to address the issue. Should the administration not be reelected, and should the choice be what we think it's going to be, all bets are off. Nothing's going to happen. Donald Trump has no interest in climate change. He has no real appreciation for it. And I think he hates regulation, and he's not going to do anything to promote the kinds of policies that will help guide us toward the future. So I would be very pessimistic about the future of change, climate change, if the administration, if we're left with the two choices that we appear to be heading towards at the moment. Now that could all change. I mean, it's a lifetime between now and November of 2024. And what we're trying to do, what I do now with Andrew Yang of the Forward Party, is working on electing those people at the grassroots level who will protect the vote after the next election, make sure things are honest and above board, and we can just hope.
Me too.
All right, another question. I was going to ask that question after, so that's really helpful.
My question is, in your opinion, should an institution like Hamilton divest from fossil fuels?
Wow, will we still get paid if we answer that honestly? Just kidding, just kidding. I think we all ought to have a strategy to do that. I think it's up to every institution. You know, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm working for, doing some work with Bloomberg Philanthropies to actually go out and about, and there's a coalition of about, I don't know, 5,000 corporations, hospitals, institutions of higher learning, you know, you name it, everybody's engaged, and all of them are looking for the best strategy, not just globally, but for themselves. So it's a good idea to think about how you can really continue to invest in clean energy here and begin to lower your fossil fuel footprint. That's what your education is all about, and I'm sure there'll be a concerted effort to take a look at that. Whether it started now or not, I don't know. But I think it has in many universities, and I think it can add value. And it's certainly putting your money where your mouth is.
It's not going to happen overnight.
No.
But the conversation has to start.
Yeah.
And this is a place, and you've seen a lot of universities, a lot of schools, as I was talking about before, that are already making these investments and starting to ensure that they're setting up a pathway to get away from fossil fuels, recognizing how detrimental they are to the environment.
There's one back there and over there.
Hi, thank you for your introduction and also discussions. For me, I am an international student from China. So back in China, I heard voices like China has repeatedly stated that it has no intention of going along with the Western push to net zero because China is a developing country and a lot of Western countries are already developed. So maybe it can be more easier for them to achieve that goal compared to developing countries. So I'm wondering if there's a model for developing countries in the world to develop their economy, like reduce poverty and protect the environment at the same time. Thank you.
Well, certainly my first G8, and I'm sure of environmental ministers, and you may have found the same thing, that was the first thing. It was the first time when I went that the developing countries had been invited. And the attitude was, this is just a big ploy by you, the developed nations, to keep us from developing economically, because you created all this pollution and you used fossil fuels and that's how you got there. So there's certainly, and there's truth to that, but there's an obligation therefore for the developed countries to help invest in new technologies and share those with the developing countries to make it easier for them to get there. Part of the reason that these countries rely so heavily on coal, it's cheap, and they need it to develop. Now, I question a little bit whether China is still a developing country. It seems to me it's got a pretty healthy, well, they're not doing that well right now. The economy is not quite as booming as it was, but it's still a pretty healthy economy. I mean, it's a huge economy. But again, they're not wrong, the developing countries, in saying, you guys did all this pollution, and that's how you got to be so robust economically, and you're just trying to hold us back. That part's not right. It's not a conscious effort on the part of the developed countries to hold back the developing countries, but that's where the obligation comes in on the part of those developed nations to all of us to help invest in the kinds of transitional changes. And that's where I think small modular reactors, for instance, and so many of those countries would make a huge difference, again, as a transition to totally green energy. But until that gets to be base power, and we figured out how really to store it well, we have to have that. We have to have something else. But it is a part of what we have to responsibility to do.
I think the only thing I would add, I don't disagree with anything that Chrissy said, is that I think one of the challenges that we're facing is how do we get the private sector to be involved in these issues? And not specifically about China, but issues in the developing world. Because I don't think we can ever get enough resources without getting the private sector involved in looking at the opportunities for them for investments. And I'm not talking about 15%. I'm talking about concessionary. You know, I'm talking about, you know, a really solid carbon market system that allows investments in the developing world to be made. And we talked about this earlier, is that, you know, I'm doing a lot of work, at least some work at Tufts, at the Fletcher School there, on the development of net zero plans for the developing world, helping them, not telling them what we envision their future to be. And I think it's the combination of the developing world getting a voice. When in Egypt, they are going to have a voice. In Dubai, they are demanding resources, and rightly so, but we're never going to be able to get it with just public sector dollars or grants. It has to be a more robust economic strategy where you actually can advance the interests of those countries in developing according to their net zero plan, but also make some resources available in the multilateral development banks and in the private sector. That's the sweet spot that we haven't yet cracked. And I do think carbon markets and offsets have to be part of that scenario. I mean, it's going to take a huge amount of resources to make this right. Not just work, but make it right.
Good question.
Hi, thank you for being here. I guess on a more personal note, like what does energy mean to you, and why is this what you're devoted to?
You might actually find a difference of agreement between Gina and I, because she drives an all-electric vehicle and I'm a hybrid electric. I haven't made that transition yet. I'm not ready for that yet. But I mean, for instance, I put solar panels in at the farm, and I have a place in Arizona, and I have solar panels there. Again, it's what's interesting to me is the cumulative impact of individual behavior. I mean, when you say to somebody, you know, if you turn off the water when you're brushing your teeth, you can save 5 to 10 gallons of water. And that may not seem like a lot to you, but think about it every night. And then if your neighbor does it and your neighbor's neighbor does it, it starts to have a huge impact. In fact, and I don't have more modern statistics, which I really need to get, but up until, I mean, it's still probably true, there's as much oil deposited along the coastline United States as was released every 6 months as was released during the Exxon Valdez, was the single largest environmental.
Was that you? Were you there at EPA when Exxon Valdez?
No, it was before.
Oh, that's
Not
right.
that old.
But that was from non-point source
couldn't
pollution. It
remember.
was from people who
am
were
that old.
changing the oil in their car and just dumped it in their driveway or on the street, not doing things right. It was from individual behavior that we were doing every 6 months, and that was creating dead zones in our oceans, because no matter where you live, if you're not right on a stream, you're still in the watershed. And what you do when you fertilize, when you don't do things properly on changing your oil, it goes into the groundwater and it goes to a storm drain, and that drains into a creek and somewhere, and it'll end up in the ocean. And so we all have to think about how we use ourselves. I drive my kids nuts because I always unplug their damn chargers if they're not charging anything, because it's always pulling energy. And they don't like me for that, but they'll have to put up
My
with it.
father always used to turn the lights off.
Oh, yeah, I turned the lights off
Drove me
everywhere.
bizarre when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Really did.
Drives me nuts.
But, you know, as Christy said, I drive an electric vehicle, all electric. I love the damn things. If you haven't driven one, you ought to, because there's the performance of those vehicles are just amazing. But you know, I live in this condo community, and if you've ever lived in a condo community with 30+ families, it's very hard to make change. So we are looking at both EV charging to put it out so that more people can have it. We're looking at heat pumps. Can't do solar. It's just not going to be available. So we're trying, but it's, oh my goodness, it's a lovely community where nobody can agree about anything, it appears. So we'll see. I've driven myself crazy before and other things. I'll drive myself crazy on this too.
Sounds like
we'll
the
get somewhere.
condo community is harder than the EPA. Maybe. Other questions from anyone?
What's your strategy to address national security concerns for rare earth metals needed in renewable energy?
Rare earth metals.
Oh, the rare earth minerals.
And national security concerns about access
Yeah.
to rare earth metals for the
I
transition.
know, I mean, that's a serious issue. And particularly, for instance, where you might not think about it is up in the Arctic, where we are not signatories to the law of the sea. And so we don't have really anything to say, but as the Bering Straits open up, there are a lot of rare earth minerals, they believe, beneath the surface. Russia, Canada, and the Scandinavian countries are all getting in there and all trying to do the extraction. And we have very little that we can do about it because we won't sign the law, because we don't want, well, I mean, one of the first things that I was told when I got to EPA on NAFTA had a process whereby a citizen could bring an allegation of environmental degradation against one of the 3 signatories. And if the other 2 agreed, you went ahead and you did an investigation. And so there'd been one brought against Canada, so we happily agreed to that. There was one brought against Mexico, we happily agreed to that. Somebody brought one against us, and I was told, you can't agree to this. I said, well, I'm sorry, but we agreed when the other countries needed to be investigated. We can't not say that we should be investigated. And so we didn't say that. I got away with it. It didn't last long, but I got away with things for a while.
You know, I think that the way that it's currently being handled is in 2 different ways. There are some rare minerals in the US.
Yes.
And those are actually larger than I think you would anticipate. And so that's being looked at. Obviously, mining of anything is its own challenge from an environmental perspective. I get that. It is part of also what's under consideration. The second thing we're doing is what any country ought to do, which is forming alliances and forming different types of trade agreements, so that your allies and you can ensure that the kind of minerals we need will be available. And that's, I think, the best we can do, and that is what's happening. There's been a lot of agreements already reached by our allies.
Additional questions? We see a lot of pointing.
Well, pointing the hand was way over there.
Yeah. Yep, sure.
Thank you for this. This has been really interesting. The focus has been very much on new energy sources and, developing new energy sources to meet demand. What about the demand side? At the Common Ground event last week, someone pointed out that with the development of AI, that's going to mean an enormous amount of energy. Where we have I live in Syracuse, we have a plant, the Micron plant that's being built, which is going to be a huge consumer of energy. How do we stay ahead of this curve with, and should we be thinking about actually using less energy and really talking about the demand side as well?
Yeah. Well, I know that I have sat in on meetings that look at AI and its implications. They're ginormous. Right. I mean, the kind of energy that it's going to take to power that is just mind-boggling. So you're absolutely right. It's going to be a huge challenge to try to meet that energy load. And we have countries where populations continue to expand. The developing world will want to have the same kind of benefits that we've enjoyed. And so it's going to be very challenging to do that. I don't have an answer to it, but you're right in raising it, because it's not just, about meeting today's load. But I don't think the answer is to demand that everybody else skimp and save and turn the lights off.
Right.
That would be too much like my father.
But you're right in saying that energy consumption has to be addressed as well.
Yeah.
Reducing our overall consumption, but that's where you get a trade-off. For instance, with electric cars, they're great, but they're only as good as the energy used to produce the electricity. And so you have to think of the whole supply chain all the way down. You can't just say, oh, this is going to solve all our problems, because it may not. None of these are easy issues to deal with, which to deal. And so it really demands some of the most creative thinking, which is why some of the programs you have here are so exciting. And it's so great to have so many young people who are really focusing on this, because this is where new jobs are going to come. This is where the innovation is going to happen, and it's going to make a difference. It's exciting to see that thinking.
Any questions?
Hi. So I'm curious how you conceive of what appears to be an escalating feeling of disillusionment with democracy on both sides of the aisle, where people are kind of deeply aware of sort of the corporate oligarchy that controls much of our, the most fundamental things in our life, which people feel like they have effectively no power over. I thought it was powerful how you were talking about sort of bringing these conversations to local places where local decision making can help real people talk through the dimensions of these different decisions, but I don't think that decontextualizes it from this powerlessness that I think most people, especially in this century, especially after Donald Trump, are kind of thinking of these issues in a more general sense. So I'm curious how, if you see this tension also in the work that you do, and if you have any, ideas about it.
Okay, well, I'm going to run off with that one.
Go.
Great.
Because that's precisely what Andrew Yang and I are doing and attempting to do with the Forward Party. We are a non-traditional party in the sense of party, because what we are is based on principle. And the principles, to be a forward candidate, you sign a pledge that you will hold the rule of law, shocker, observe the Constitution, be willing to work with anyone to solve problems, and work to expand access to the polls, whether it's ranked choice voting, open primaries, fusion voting, whatever breaks the control of the two parties. Because what we have now is two parties that control the system exactly the way they want it, and they don't want any change, and that's why people feel frustrated and hopeless. But if you want to know where the problem started, it started with us, because the average voter primary turnout is still not much more than 10%. It's maybe 12 or 13%. Well, you know, what does that tell you? It's a very small group of each of the parties, because, by the way, the largest political party in the United States today is the Independent Party, independents. They are more than either the Republicans or the Democrats. And so they're making the choices, and they tend to be the most partisan people, and they tend to be more on the extreme. So when you get to a general election, people say, I don't like either of these choices, so I'm not going to vote. That's the wrong response. You're telling those in office either I don't care or you're doing a fine job. And so what we're doing is saying we're not going to dictate to our candidates what issues they have to take on or the position they have to take on abortion or guns. That's going to be up to the states, parties, and the candidates themselves. What do they believe? What do they really think? What do their constituents want? Not what some party tells them. And I described this earlier to one group back in 1997 when I ran, after I won my re-election as governor, I was asked to run for the US Senate, and I didn't really want to, but I went down to meet with the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, and this was 1997. And I was told, absolutely, if I said one word about campaign finance reform, I wouldn't get a penny out of them. That's the way the parties control things. They will tell the candidates, these are the issues you can bring up, but you can't bring up anything else, and this is how you have to address them. And that's just wrong. And of the 500,000 elective offices across this nation, in any given year, 70% of those are uncontested. Voters only have one choice. And of those, 5 to 10% of those offices are never filled. Again, we think that's wrong. So Forward is, we're putting up candidates against MAGA candidates, election deniers, in offices where there's never been a choice, where it's locked up by one party or the other, because that's where you feel frustrated. If you're a Republican in a Democratic district or vice versa, you think, well, what's the point of voting? I mean, you're a Republican in New York City, why vote? You're not going to be heard. That's why we think open primaries, ranked choice voting, that sort of thing is so important, to make it so the parties can't control who the candidates are. It's up to the people to be able to control that. So those are the and there are lots of groups. I mean, Forward is one, that's what we're working on. It's a party, it's at the grassroots level, building up, not coming from the top down, and it's different. But we're in every state now, and we have 20 to 30 candidates on the ballot tomorrow, and we're building to 200 to 400 for 2024. And we will be endorsing some senatorial and congressional, but we're not playing in the presidential at all. We don't want to be a spoiler there and let somebody get reelected. And so we are different, but there are other groups that are working on trying to keep our democracy and protect our democracy. We're hanging on by a thread. We really are. 2020, we preserved our democracy because there were a few people who were willing to stand up to the hate and to the attacks that they went through, to say, no, this is what the vote really was. They refused to allow themselves to be bullied. And those people need to be supported. They need to hear that we appreciate what they did, but right now we're losing them. A lot of them are walking away. People who have administered elections forever are saying, I can't put up with this anymore. I'm getting threatened, I'm getting attacked, it's not worth it. And we're gonna be in trouble if we don't have the people who will protect the vote, however it comes out. I mean, it doesn't matter as long as every vote's counted, every legal vote is counted, and we protect the right of the people to be heard.
You are a great person. Seriously.
You're not so bad either.
Thanks.
Thanks. We have time for about one more question from the audience.
I was curious about like supply chain issues. You talked a little bit about with like offshore wind that there's supply chain issues, but I know that like in solar too, there's a lot of like clogging in the queues. So I was curious like what your take on was for like international supply chain issues and like domestic supply chain issues.
Yeah, it's very challenging right now. Offshore wind in particular, the cost escalation for offshore wind is challenging. But solar has been challenging as well. I was in the White House when we had a real inability to get solar panels in from China because Xinjiang and it was just, there was the forced labor issues arose, and we tried to work through those, and we did to some extent. But what the US is really focused on is more domestic capacity, because we just can't rely on folks that may not be our allies to actually supply the kind of materials that we need. So in the US, we're really trying to rebuild the solar chain that was dismantled quite a while ago. But it's going to take time, and it still remains very difficult. Offshore wind is one of the most disappointing, problems that we're facing now, because we just didn't anticipate this. And it was so promising, and it's so much energy. It has to get back on track, but I think that's going to take a while.
All right. I'm going to bring things back to a closing set of questions and conversation. And one of the things that we haven't really talked about yet with this energy transition, we've had a vision of a future where your parents don't have to tell you to turn off the lights because it's coming from renewable energy sources and a grid that doesn't burn fossil fuels, and you can plug in your EV and enjoy driving it, and that's great. Some of these technologies, even with the support from the Inflation Reduction Act, are quite expensive. And some of them, in terms of how they work, it's hard to imagine them working when you think about people living in an apartment building, people who are renting. The vision of a lot of these technologies kind of fits a white, middle, suburban class America, but not necessarily much of America that doesn't fit that mold.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about the sort of justice elements of this. What are we doing to ensure that this transition away from fossil fuels works for everyone? And where are the problems right now? What do we need to be doing more of in terms of climate justice? We know the Inflation Reduction Act isn't everything. There's more to be done. What can we be doing to ensure justice? Because the track record is not great in terms of these kinds of things.
Well, I guess I'll start. The Inflation Reduction Act does require that 40% of the investments are made in communities that I guess are defined as environmental justice communities. For obvious reasons, they've been redlined and disinvested in for a long time. They also need to be the vast recipient of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is all infrastructure. And so there will be a significant amount of resources going to these communities. The challenge is that we need to make sure that those communities have the capacity to get the money and utilize it the way that they think their communities ought to utilize it and ought to look like. What are the benefits that they're trying to accrue? And I think that's the good news, is that a lot of philanthropic dollars have come into nonprofits who are really ramping up their NGO infrastructure in environmental justice communities to do the kind of training and collaboration and capacity building that's going to be required for these communities to benefit and take care of these resources. So progress is being made. Is that all we need to do? No. But there's real opportunity to transform these communities in a way that brings value and benefits to them.
It's not only going to be the new investment, it's going to be repairing the damage that we've done to those communities over the years, with the location of so many polluting facilities near those communities, because they didn't have the political chops, as it were, to be able to fight back against them. And so there's a responsibility there to ensure that we are improving the facilities that are around them and in them, and improve their emissions, reduce their water usage, make it a healthier environment just with what's already there besides the new investment and bringing in new technologies.
I think the other things that I've been working on with Bloomberg Philanthropies, beyond doing sort of city level and state level work, is that, you know, the oil is now finding its new home in petrochemicals, which is making plastics. And all of those large facilities, there's more than 150 expansions of those facilities being proposed in Cancer Alley in Louisiana, which is properly called Cancer Alley. We're talking about other facilities in Alabama. And we're all fighting these things, but I'm telling you, it makes no sense to allow these expansions to go through. It makes literally no sense. And yet they continue, they persist. And we know that we tried hard to clean up the air in Louisiana, not hard enough. You know, so that we have so much work to do in these communities, and it's just discouraging.
It's the rateable change.
It's not just petrochemicals, but we still have 170 old coal power plants in the United States of America that are operating. Some of them under requirements to close, and now they're deciding, oh, no, I don't need to close, I'll do CCS.
Carbon capture and sequestration.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I have to be nice because I'm getting excited.
No, go.
That is untruthful. Because a lot of when you do CCS, that money goes out, and you know what it's, I mean, those emissions are captured for sure, and they now be used to actually do enhanced oil recovery. Oh, goody, congratulations for all the work you've been doing, right? So we have real challenges here. I don't want you to get this rosy picture of we've got a lot of investments without realizing that we've got a lot of crap out there that we have to address and fix. That's what it's going to take, honesty and integrity. We have to get this stuff moving.
So,
sorry, I said crap, I didn't really mean to.
Yes, you did. Of course you did.
See, I did, I'm sorry, I had to.
So one of the challenges for people paying attention to this is how to know what to trust, right? Because you can easily read something right now that says carbon capture and sequestration, this is the solution we need, we don't need to change our energy system.
What do you think about that?
I think
okay, there we go.
What you just said. I agree with you.
You can use the word. It's all right, we've heard it.
So I'm trying to pivot it into a question here about other people are hearing this stuff and they might not have Gina McCarthy telling them this is crap.
Yeah.
So how do we have everyone know how to deal with what, to separate the snake oil or the false solutions from this is really where we need to go? It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, and for a lot of people, you hear something, it sounds good. How do we know who to trust, and how can we find sources of information, especially given all the work you're doing and how polarized our climate is?
There's an old saying that a tiger doesn't change its stripes. Look at who you're dealing with. You know, when one of the largest, most polluting coal-fired, power plants like Four Corners, that's now saying, no, we don't need to close in 2030. We're going to just do CCS. You got to look at their history. You've got to recognize that they're posing significant health burdens in those communities. It's just unconscionable. These tigers don't change their stripes.
No, you have to look at the source.
Yeah,
who's the source giving you this information, and then make your decision based on that.
And we have to keep pushing for better laws and regulations, even at EPA.
Yeah.
Our regulations on clean air have to keep getting tougher. I know EPA keeps working on it, but we've got to keep pushing hard.
Well,
and water regulations.
We got handicapped, EPA did for 4 years.
Yes,
and
that's right.
The staff is still below what it was when I was there.
Yep.
Lost a lot of the institutional knowledge because it interestingly enough, EPA had the longest serving civil servant pool of any department or agency in the federal government. People who got to EPA really cared about preserving human health and the environment. They were dedicated to it. And they didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay there. And then they went put into hibernation, is a nice word to say it, for 4 years. And a lot of them just said, okay, I've had enough, I'm gone. And that's posing a real challenge to the agency. And it's still not staffed to where it needs to be. But then again, we're not going to staff the IRS, and that's a really brilliant program. We're going to spend more money, but we're not going to let them go after the people who aren't paying their taxes. Just let's go after the
You
people
sound
who
like
aren't
a
paying their
Democrat
taxes.
sometimes, Chrissy. I just have to make this.
I've been told that.
So one other question, it's not really an energy question, but it comes up a lot and students are very interested in it. We've talked about the need to transition to a net zero future and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible. Many of those come from fossil fuels, but another significant source of greenhouse gas emissions is animal agriculture.
Yeah.
There are solutions proposed about capturing methane, feeding cows different things so that they burp out less methane.
Not burping.
What is it?
To the other end.
Correct.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
I thought there was a fancier word for it. I'm sorry.
here's the question. Do we need to eat less meat? Do we need to consume fewer animal products? Are there solutions out there other than that you foresee? It's something that comes up all the time in conversations with students. What do we do about it?
I have a cattle farm. We're raising cattle. I kind of like my meat. But no, I mean, yes, it makes sense to eat less red meat, but I don't think it makes sense to eliminate it from our diets entirely. There's some good things in red meat. But there are, for instance, we're doing rotational grazing at the farm. And when you do that, and if you do it the right way, you don't really have to feed your cattle any kind of grain. You can get them through the winter without having to grain them. And that means there is less emissions, less of the methane emissions from whichever end you want to have it out of. Those kinds of things work, but it takes time, and it's hard to ask we're also regenerative in trying to get the soils back to where they were, where nature had intended them to be. And we've been in it now doing it for some 6 years, and we're only about 40% there. Because when land has been farmed for a long period of time in the traditional way, the soil is heavily compromised. And no matter how much chicken manure you put on it for the acidity, or how much else you do in eliminating your pesticides and your fertilizers, it's going to take time, and that costs farmers. So again, it's a place where government has a role to play, because you can't ask farmers to give up their yield. I mean, for us, it's okay. We can afford it. I'm not living off the farm as the sole income, but for people who the farm that's their income, they can't afford to just, okay, for 3 years, I'm going to give up a third of my production. That's not fair to ask them, and they can't do it. And so government has to provide a program and provide a way to help them over that hump, to give them some form of tax benefits, or to give them outright grants to do the process. But it's going to take time and education, but it can be done that way. I mean, there's a lot we can do, and opening the fields, grassing, having the cattle be the ones that plow it under, as it were, or the goats or the pigs. They do a really good job of that. And then natural fertilizers, there are definitely ways to do it. But again, our consumption of red meat, it wouldn't hurt to be less. I mean, if you have a cholesterol problem, it's probably good. But then again, if you get grass-fed beef, your cholesterol goes down.
I didn't know that.
Now you do.
Yeah, there you go. The only thing I would add, Christy, is that is that there are some, like very big swine farms and factory farming
Yeah, I'm talking
is
smaller farms.
pretty much unconscionable.
Yes.
And it also results in huge amounts of methane. If you've had the unlucky job of going to one of those big farms, it's quite amazing, not in a good way.
All right.
And there is a benefit in the IRA to actually going towards methane digesters. The only fundamental question that poses is, should we actually help improve these places or get rid of them? And I think those questions are very legitimate. I don't think I would ever want to tell people what they can and can't eat, but I do think that factory farming, there's got to be a kinder, better, more environmental solution. It's just unconscionable.
Although they did a pretty good job in the pig farms with Jimmy Hoffa. I'm convinced that's where he is. They didn't bury him under their meadowlands, they fed him to the pigs.
You just don't want to claim him, that's all.
No, it was a pig farm up there, up that part of the turnpike up near
Seriously?
the meadowlands. It used to be pig
Now we're in a
farms.
whole other discussion.
So I want to close by asking both of you for any final thoughts about what to do about fossil fuels. We all use them. We've heard about the need to move away from them. We haven't talked too much about fossil fuel companies, but how should we be feeling when we use fossil fuels? And what's the future of fossil fuels, if anything, at all in our energy transition? So sort of closing 30-second thoughts. What do you want to leave people with to think about as they walk out of here?
I just think it would be great if people could think about this challenge more in their everyday lives. I think Hamilton's doing a great job, obviously, at providing information and exciting opportunities and internships and others, but it needs to be uppermost in people's minds. I think we leave it to an academic setting to have these discussions. You know what I mean? And I think this has to be part of a more normal conversation about how we have to live our lives together. I would like that to happen, because I think that's when change happens.
That's why I believe in engaging with your local government to say, what are you hearing about this? What do you care about? Where is our power coming from? We all want to be able to flip the light switch and have it come on, and not many of us stop to think, okay, where's that power coming from? What's the mix? But it's time we started to bring that up as an area of concern to local government, saying, okay, guys, men and women, where are we on this? What is our mix? What is your plan to get us off fossil fuels? What are you looking at to the future? How are you planning on attacking it? And that gets us to a regular kind of conversation, and do it at the local level and start that transition. But that's how it happens, because that's what influences policymakers, is when they hear from their constituents saying, I care about this. This is important to me, and we need to make some changes.
So I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and I hope that you will leave tonight being more optimistic about our ability to address the climate crisis based on what you've heard tonight. And please join me in thanking both of our guests this evening. It's been a great conversation.